Hello everyone, welcome to Dr. Young's live taped channel. I'm Dr. Young. If you are new to my channel, please make sure you subscribe to my channel and switch on the bell so that you will not miss any new videos in the future. Have you heard of the 1918 flu pandemic, which is also called the Spanish flu? It was from 1918 but ended in 1920. It is the deadliest pandemic in history. Normally, influenza pandemic is an epidemic of an influenza virus that spreads on a worldwide scale and infects a large population. There were 5 influenza pandemics during the last 140 years, which caused high level of mortality. The Spanish flu occurred in 1918, was the first of 2 pandemics caused by the H1N1 influenza virus. The second was the swine flu in 2009. Spanish flu was an unusual deadly influenza pandemic, lasting 3 years in total. It infected 500 million people, which equivalent almost 1/3 of the total world population at that time. But why so-called Spanish flu? Because at that time, it was during the World War I. The World War I census minimized reports the illness and mortality in Germany, the UK, France, and the USA. However, the newspapers freely reported the epidemic stories in the neutral country Spain, which was why every people call that as a Spanish flu, which was a mistake. So from the recent year, the WHO decided to name new human infectious diseases without the country's name to minimize the effect on the nations, economies, and people. The more modern terms for this virus include 1918 influenza pandemic or 1918 flu pandemic. The death toll is estimated to have 7 million or 50 million, and possibly as high as 100 million, making it one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. In India alone, it was reported almost 12 to 17 million people died, but in Japan, it was 1.5 million people died. Most influenza outbreaks disproportionately kill the very young and very old people, with a high survival rate for those in between. But the Spanish flu pandemic resulted in a higher than expected mortality rate for young adults, which was between 20 and 24 years old, almost 50% of the total deaths. Some analyses have shown the virus to be particularly deadly because it triggers a cytokine storm which revigors the stronger immune system of young adults. In contrast, a 2007 analysis of medical journal from the period of the pandemic found that the malnourishment, overcrowded medical camps and hospitals, and poor hygiene promoted bacterial superinfection. There have been statements that the epidemic originated from the United States. Historian Africa Crosby stated that in 2003 that the flu originated in Kansas City in US. John Barry described it in 2004, a January 1918 outbreak in Haskell County, Kansas. In 2018, Professor Michael Worrelby found evidence against the disease originating from Kansas and suggested a North American origin. Other studies suggested that the reassortment of the N1H1 virus likely occurred in or around 1915. It's 3 years earlier than reported. According to virologist John Oxford, a similar outbreak occurred in March 1917 at Army barracks in Artapos, France, and Aldershot, England. A report in 2016 in the Journal of the Chinese Medical Association found evidence that the 1918 virus had been circulating in the European armies for months or possible years before the 1918 pandemic. In January 1918, the first case was observed in Haskell County, Kansas, in the USA. On 4th March 1918, Albert Gachel reported sick at Fort Riley, making him the first recorded victim of the flu. Within days, 522 men at the camp had reported sick. By 11 March 1918, the virus had reached Queens, New York. In August 1918, a more virulent strain appeared simultaneously in Brest, France, in Freetown, Sierra Leone. In September, soldiers at Boston Navy Yard and Camp Davis and other U.S. military sites were soon afflicted. In 1993, Claude Hanno suggested that the former virus was likely to have come from China, then mutated in the United States, then spread to Brest, France, in Europe. However, in 2018, Professor Michael Worreby found evidence against the disease being spread by Chinese workers. The workers entered Europe did not result in detectable spread, unlikely to have been the original hosts. When an infected person sneezes or coughs, more than 500,000 virus particles can spread to those nearby. The close quarters and massive troops movement of the World War I may cause the spread of this virus. Some speculated the soldiers, malnourishment, and stresses. The second wave of the 1918 pandemic was much more deadly than the first. The first wave had resembled a typical flu epidemic. Those most at risk were the sicker and elderly, while younger, healthier people recovered easily. By August, when the second wave began in France, Sierra Leone, and the United States, the virus had mutated to a much more deadly form. October 1918 was the month with the highest fatality rate of the whole pandemic. This increased severity have been attributed to the circumstances of the First World War. Soldiers with a mild strain stayed where they were, while the severely ill was sent on crowded train to crowded field hospital, spreading the deadly virus. The second wave began, and the flu quickly spread around the world again. Some communities closed all stores and all required customers to leave orders outside. There were reports that healthcare workers could not tend the sicker, nor the grave diggers bury the dead because they too were ill. Mass graves were dug by steam shovel and bodies buried without coffins in many places. Several pandemic island territories were hit particularly hard. From New Zealand, the flu reached Tonga, kills 80% of the population, Nora 16% of the population, and Fuji 5% of the population, which reached 9,000 people in a small country. Worst infected was Western Soma. 90% of the population was infected, 30% of adult men, 22% of adult women, and 10% of the children died. In New Zealand, 8,573 deaths were attributed to the 1918 pandemic influenza. In Ireland, the pandemic flu accounted for 10% of total deaths in 1918. For the less infected areas, China may have experienced a relatively mild flu season in 1918 compared to other areas of the world. The Japanese government severely restricted sea travels to from the mainland when the pandemic struck with 0.4% mortality rate like Russia. America's Soma in the French colony of New Caledonia also succeeded in preventing even a single death from influenza through effective quarantines. After the lesser second wave strike in late 1918, new cases dropped abruptly. In Philippines, for example, 4,597 people died in the week ending 16 October. But by 11 November, influenza had almost disappeared from the city, which may due to the doctors became more effective in prevention and treatment. However, another theory holds that the 1918 virus mutated extremely rapidly to a less lethal strain. A 2006 study found that cohorts in utero during the pandemic displayed reduced educational attainment, increased risk of physical disability, lower income, lower socio-economic status, and higher transfer payment received compared with other birth cohorts. The flu had been linked to the outbreak of another disease in the 1920s later on. So from the history of the 1918 flu pandemic, you can say the effect of the pandemic is not only the health of the people, but also social-economic influence for the whole world was huge. If you like my video, please thumb up, and please also subscribe to my channel. You will not miss any future new videos. Thank you very much.